Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connecticut LGBTQ Film Festival, and welcome to closing night. We are here with Monica Zanetti, who's the writer and director of the film, and Sophie Hawkshaw, who plays Ellie in the film Ellie and Abby and Ellie's Dead Hunt. So you guys have it's the coolest title of a film in the festival this year.
Thank you. It causes people a lot of pain.
Intentionally so. Well, thank you so much for joining us and bringing this wonderful film to us. Marina and I are going to be tag teaming a little bit tonight. So on the Q&A, because we are so excited to talk to you, we couldn't just limit it to one of us. So I don't know, Marina, what's your first question for him?
The first question, I heard somewhere that it's the first lesbian rom-com, or is it first lesbian coming out of age?
Coming out of Australia?
Yeah.
Yes, we believe, and I say this very much based on my research and my experience and knowing what's out there, it appears to definitely be the first lesbian rom-com to really come out of Australia, particularly in a feature film. I think there's quite a few like web series out there, but as far as something that was able to kind of be released and embraced kind of in a mainstream setting, if we're not the first, then we're part of a very rare group of films. Yes, it's not a genre that Australia is known for making.
Yeah, and it's it's the past few years been really good for LGBTQ rom-coms, but yours is very, very special and it's very different. Yeah, and it's so fun. It's just amazing.
Oh, thank you.
So first it was a play, right? And
yeah.
Then it was a film. But how did you come up with the idea itself?
The original idea came from like a couple of things. It came from like making the decision that I wanted to write a lesbian rom-com, like a kind of a prom film about lesbians. And so that was kind of like the nugget of the idea. But I did know that I wanted it to be fun and I wanted it to have a happy ending. And then I kind of thought about like this whole thing of like wanting to have a kind of a simpler gay love story, and and why that is and why I'm able to have that, because that kind of reflects my experience. And it was that thing of realizing like this reflects my experience because of so many people that came before that couldn't have that experience, including my uncle, who the film is dedicated to. And so I thought I really needed to include that story, kind of just to acknowledge the fact that you can't have one without the other. Like you can have this simple love story now, almost the same lesson that Ellie makes throughout the film, I had while writing it. So those are kind of like the two, where like the two nuggets of the idea came from.
What was the most difficult part of converting it to a feature film from a play?
The getting it made part. The script allowed itself to adapt quite easily, mainly because when people came, like I wrote it as a play, but everyone who came to see it was like, that felt like a film. Like the pacing, the start, like everyone's like, and it had really short scenes, like, which is quite different. In a play, you usually have really long scenes because you're not changing sets is really hard and all that kind of stuff. So you try to do that as little as possible. Whereas this had like it was cut quite quickly, like a film. And so it did lend itself quite easily to being a film. But yes, getting the extra money that it involves to make a film and all that kind of stuff, that was definitely the hardest part.
So why don't we switch a little bit to Sophie? We haven't heard from you yet. Tell us a little bit about the casting process. I mean, is this your first lead in a feature film?
Yeah, this is my first lead. I was actually in the play. So back when it was a little theatre show in this tiny flight path theatre in Sydney, I played Ellie in the play, and then just kind of hung on to Mon and got to be in the film. So it worked out very well. Persistence, friends is. But I was the only cast member that came from the play. So the rest of the cast were cast for the feature film, which was fun to kind of be attached so early on to the film, and be able to follow that process was very rewarding for me as an actor and as a creative, I suppose, as well. Like seeing the way it changed and developed, and I'm very emotionally invested, as you can probably tell, in the film, because I've been around for a long time. It's been years, so it's fun to be riding the wave now. Yeah, but the rest of the actors were cast through fairly traditional processes, and Mon kind of talking people into things, and she was definitely a big calling card for, I think, a lot of people, which was fun.
So, Sophie, how much is your character? What was your character development from the play to the film? Was it different, or is it still the same?
I think Ellie is very similar from the play to the film. I think her kind of essence really remained, and I think a lot of the other characters really developed in really great ways in between the play and the film, but Ellie kind of stayed fairly similar, only because she was a really well-rounded character, I think, from the play. And I think a play is sort of like an ultimate rehearsal room for a film. In Australia, it's quite common to do the whole make it as a play first and then go into film. It's kind of a good path for stories to be told. And so, yeah, as an actor, it was like a really intense rehearsal for a play with a couple of years in between. But I think, yeah, there's a lot of Ellie that was developed during the play that we carried over into the film, which was really great. And it meant that when we got there to shoot, I knew Ellie so well because I'd done it. I played her before, and I think it made the process easier because we shot really quickly. Like, we shot the whole film in 2 weeks, and so Ron gave me like 2 takes, and there's a lot of me talking. So there was a lot of Mon being like, "Cool, so you can do it one more time, and then that's it. So you better nail it." So I was thankful that I knew Ellie so well that it made that process a lot easier.
Awesome.
But also, acting is so different when you are in a play versus the film. So how was the acting for you?
I think that it was a bit challenging to go from the play where Ellie's journey happens live, and we see, like, I feel all the feelings as they go, versus shooting a movie where you just do things randomly. And Mon was very gracious in that she kind of saved some of the bigger stuff for last, so I could kind of get there with the other actors. But I think it's just like adjusting and working on it and smashing it out and finding the truth in the moment.
Great. And Monica, can you talk to us a little bit about the casting of the remainder of the cast?
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, they all did kind of have different ways of coming to us. Julia, who plays the aunt, she was cast through casting directors, but I did know her, and I was familiar with her work. So that was kind of good when they were like, "What about Julia?" I was like, "Oh, great, yes, actually, Julia's perfect." So that was really good. When it came to casting Abby was a bit of a longer process, just because the girl who played Abby in the play is an actress called Geraldine Viswanathan, who is now quite famous. She's just done the Broken Hearts Gallery there, and Miracle Workers with Daniel Radcliffe. Like she kind of did our play in Sydney and then left because she got a role in that film Blockers. So she was attached to the film for a while, and then it became clear that it wasn't going to happen. Like we weren't going to be able to bring her back.
She's too famous for us.
Yeah, she's famous and we couldn't afford her flights. And then, but Zoe was someone that I had thought of because Zoe was in a show that Geraldine, the other Abby, was in. So they had already worked together. And so I had seen Zoe's work just because I'd been watching Geraldine in the show. And so when Geraldine couldn't do it, Zoe was someone that I did think, I wonder, like, they could be a good choice. And so so I had some chats to Zoe, and then we brought them in to do a bit of a read with Soph to make sure that, you know, that the chemistry was there or that it was going to work and that they could, you know, that we had a good rapport, like direction-wise. And so that ended up being a really good match and such a great pairing. I'm so happy with the two of them together. It's so excellent. And then Marta, who plays the mother, she's one of our Australia's most treasured actresses. So we really wanted her. And luckily she was doing a play with Zoe at the time that we were trying to cast. And Zoe was able to get the script to Marta, and Marta read the script and really loved it and was really keen to be involved. So that was really wonderful. And then Rachel House, who plays Aunt Patty, is one of New Zealand's finest actors, who luckily Soph and I had both in our history of working as assistants in film, had both been an assistant on a film or a TV show that involved us driving Rachel House to set. So we had both met her in that capacity. And that's how I had her email address. And so I was able to send her an email to say, hi, I don't know if you remember me, but I once drove you to set. We used to talk all the time, but I made a film and I think you'd be really wonderful in it. And so luckily she said yes. So that was really, really, that was a real exciting moment. But yeah, it was just a dream cast, really, when you look at them all together. Like, how did I get so lucky? What a wonderful cast.
That Rachel story is actually wild because she'd been flown to Sydney to work on a show that I was assisting on. And while she was in Sydney, she was going to have a drink with Mon to talk about Ellie and Abby. And I was driving her and just chatting as you do. And she mentioned that she was having a drink with this director named Monica. Do I know her? And I was like, and Mon hadn't told me that this was happening. And I was like, is it Monica Zanetti? She was like, yeah, Zanetti. Yeah, that's it. Ellie and Abby or something. And I was like, so I am Ellie. She was so confused. She was like, but you're my driver. What do you mean, Ellie? And I was like, welcome to the Australian industry. Everyone does everything. But yeah, so she thought it was funny. And I think that like beautiful serendipity of all of those moments intersecting, she was like, I think I should do this. I think the universe is telling me to make this movie. It all worked out very well.
It did.
I know there was a commitment to having LGBT diversity on the set. So cast members and behind the scenes, could you talk a little bit about that, Monica?
Yeah. So when I was trying to get the film funded, I had made the decision from the beginning that I wanted it to be at least a 50% LGBT identifying cast. Crew, I didn't set a kind of a precedent like that, but we just ended up with a very queer crew. It was incredible. But basically, you know, the people at the top and the people making the decisions, you know, in order to make sure the story is authentic. I think particularly too because in Australia, because we make so little queer cinema or queer stories, and when we do, it is made by straight men starring straight men, basically. And so I felt really strongly that in making this story, it had to be representative. I also think that when that happens, so when you are someone, you know, who is telling a story, a queer story that's not your own and that doesn't involve people from the community, I found that because, you know, someone had done it and not used a queer cast, they'd used very famous actors, that it made, when I was trying to come in and pitch to distributors and say, the representation is really important, it made it much harder for me because they could just point to that other film and be like, well, they didn't, and that film was successful. So, obviously this is not this thing that you're saying is important. It's obviously not that important. So by doing that, they made it so much harder for me to kind of get this. And so in the end, when a lot of distributors that I had been talking to, hopefully that were going to help us get it financed, were like, look, we love the story, but we can't give you that kind of cast commitment. That's just too hard. That was when I kind of made the decision that like we were going to have to crowdfund and do it ourselves, because I knew if I made it and I could show it to people, then they would get it, and then they'd be like, oh great, yes, we'll distribute your film, or like, yes, we can help you finance it. So it was like a harder process, like taking that hard line about the cast really made it harder to get it made. But I'm so glad I did, because like in the end, what we made was so wonderful, and that cast was so wonderful, and we wouldn't have had them if I had made it this way. It would have ended up a very different project. And so while it was a harder way to make it, I'm just really glad that I stuck to my guns and did that. And I think we ended up with about a 40% cast that identified. So it was higher than what I wanted, which was wonderful. And then, having that in the crew as well was just so great, because I think everyone just instantly felt safe on set, which I think is really important when you're dealing with stories like this. It was very safe, very supportive. And it's just been this like ongoing celebration. We've still got like a group chat, and, everyone gets any bit of news or release, everyone gets really involved. And it just feels like it's something that we all made together, and which is really great. It doesn't feel like that thing where you just come onto a film, you do the job, and then you leave. It feels like it seems to have stayed with everyone, which is really lovely.
That's awesome.
How does it work, even that if you're trying to get more diversity in your film, then you don't get any funding? It's not like logical.
I know, and it just came down to them kind of being like, in Australia, they believe that there is 3 actors that can sell a film to make a film financially viable. So you've got to have one of those 3 actors. And by me saying like, here's why I'm not going to cast those actors because of this, and I also think people will get much more behind it if the cast is authentic. And they were like, no, you're wrong. Like they were kind of like, you need to rewrite the mum and make it a dad, because it's easier to get a male actor in that age bracket to sell a film than it is to get, a woman. Meanwhile, like Marta had been the lead of like 3 of our highest rated television shows on screen at that time. It was so insulting to, to her to be like, is that enough? But this dude once did a film like 8 years ago and everyone loved it. So I think, you'd be better off getting that. It was just these really baffling conversations that
and also the fact that like in Australia, to get funding, most of our films are funded by the government, which is a weird system, but we're small. And to get that funding, you have to have a distributor attached in order to be eligible for the funding. And so that was our catch-22 of like, we knew that we could make the film, but we couldn't get the money from like normal ways, which is why we had to crowdfund, because Mon.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
So going to the story itself, it's kind of a conversation between 2 generations of lesbians, right? And it's so well done, and it's so interesting. And when you think about it, Ellie is coming out and she's still afraid, and it's 2020. She's still afraid, and you were talking about things that happened 20, 30 years ago. And can you guys talk about that comparison and how is it like in Australia, and what happened during those 20, 30 years?
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to show kind of the difference of like what we would perceive like homophobia to be now as opposed to what it would be then. I think in Ellie's case, you've got this young person who lives in a very progressive world, or a much more progressive world, who is, quite comfortable with who she is because she knows other gay people, like she's exposed to them, and that's fine. But the things that she comes up against are much more subtle and much more less in your face as what her aunt would have gone through. Um, so things like when Ellie has the conversation with Patty and she says, my mum hasn't teased me about liking this girl, but she used to tease me about like if a boy liked me, she'd tease me, and this she won't tease me. Like it's such a small thing that I'm sure Ellie's mum doesn't even notice that she's doing, but for Ellie, it's like a real punch in the heart. Like she can see so clearly that difference in her mum's behavior. And so it's those little things that are affecting her, and the fact that, she feels comfortable to be this person because she has a belief that it doesn't make her different. It doesn't make her stand out. She's just like everyone else, which means she doesn't have to deal with any differences that come from that. And her aunt is the one that's challenging that, which is where a lot of their tension comes from. And then in the aunt's case, I wanted to look at some real things that happened in Australia, where we had a lot of people know in Australia. It's our most famous one is that we had what's called Mardi Gras, which originally started as a protest of gay people basically saying like we don't want to just hide in bars anymore and be out of sight. We want to be like in the streets, and they had this march down Oxford Street, which ended up in a very violent, arrest by police, and that's quite a famous part of our history because now we have Mardi Gras every year. But we have had a lot of other protests and a lot of other events, and it was very important to me because that's the other thing is that when we do cover queer history in Australian cinema and TV, we only talk about Mardi Gras, and so I wanted to talk not about Mardi Gras. And so I found this other rally which happened as a result of Mardi Gras, but 10 years later, where, Mardi Gras had been happening for 10 years, and then the Conservative parties decided that they were going to reclaim Oxford Street, which is where Mardi Gras is held, to be like, it's not going to be a gay street anymore. We want it back. And so that is the rally that's featured in the film. It's called the Reclaimed Oxford Street March. And while that was like a bad protest, nobody died on that particular day, like nobody was killed. But the story of Tara is based on a lot of stories in our history. Like it's not one in particular, but it's based on a series of them. I mean, we still now have people that are only just getting justice for their loved ones that were killed in a way that made it look like an accident or a suicide that police weren't interested in pursuing. And so it was just put down to a suicide and left. And it's only now like 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, because their families have kept fighting and kept pushing for justice, that it's come out that they've been able to be like, oh no, that was a murder and we know who did it. So, some of these crimes are now getting solved, and it was kind of those families that keep pushing for justice. That was the inspiration basically for Tara's story. It's just like a common narrative throughout Australian queer history.
That's awesome. Thank you for touching on all that. You blew through at least 3 of my questions. So I understand there is a lot of renewed interest in the, everything that was going on in the 1980s gay history. There's like a new TV series there, right? Deepwater and
we had Deepwater. Yes, Deepwater was based on the Bondi hate crimes, which was a lot of them. A lot of young men mysteriously fell off a cliff in Bondi, and then they, were able to investigate and realize that it was a string of murders that were all connected.
Wow. Incredible. I don't know. I just had one other thing I wanted to throw at, less serious, but I really loved all the music in the film. Australia is known for fun music. I mean, you have Kylie Minogue, right? So
We do.
But I just want to compliment you on that and ask you to tell us a little bit about where the music came from.
Yes. The music was also a determination to have queer artists being the soundtrack. So basically the whole soundtrack, bar maybe one or two songs, is all Australian queer artists. The main one is a band called Cub Sport, which are from Brisbane. And when I heard their music, I instantly was just like, oh my God, we need to get this to Ellie and Abby. And I sent them many emails and Instagram messages until they wrote back to me. Another artist featured, and it's pretty much the same story, is that I would hear a song and be like, we need to get that for the film. And then I'd find them on Instagram and then I'd stalk them. Montaigne was another one. And then also The Preachers was another one. And all for those reasons, all being like, these are all LGBT artists that have excellent, well-known music. And I really want them on the soundtrack. So it was a mix of getting them involved and getting them excited, and then getting Screen Australia, who didn't end up giving us money to film the film because we crowdfunded it, going to them and saying like, okay, now is the time that I need you to help us. I need you to pay for this music. And they did. So it was I'm really glad they did, because I love the soundtrack.
Thank you.
Great. That's awesome. So, thank you. And Sophie, I know that you do many things. You're not just an actress. Can you tell about that? And you wrote your own short film, right? I don't know what.
Yes, I have my fingers in many pies. My pies in many fingers. I write and direct as well. I started acting, and I guess wanted to have some ownership over the stories that I told as well. Sometimes acting can feel quite isolating, and you kind of feel like you're waiting for people to give you permission to tell stories. And so that's why I went into writing and directing. I went to film school and did all that. I had a film called Fence, which is about the impact of onshore detention of asylum seekers, which is a big issue in Australia. And that film won an actor award, which is like Australian Oscars, which was fun years ago. And so I do that as well as acting and trying to churn out more stuff in COVID season.
That's great. What are you doing next?
I have a short that I'm trying to get up about teenage girls. Apparently that's my niche. It's about teenage girls getting their periods. Fun times. And then I have a show that I'm trying to get up as well about the end of the world.
You're choosing your words very carefully.
Yeah, that's right. I'm like, how can I say that without giving it all away? Yeah.
That's very impressive. I'm sorry, Shane, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to ask Monica what she's working on next.
Right. Yeah, me too.
I am writing. I've got a couple of TV shows that are in different stages of development that I'm trying to get up or trying to sell now at that stage. Nothing has sold yet, but I'll keep your eyes peeled. And then I am going on to direct something which has not been announced, but is something that is shooting here in February, which is very exciting. That's going to be my first kind of series directing gig, which I'm very excited about. And then just kind of helping other people develop. I've been doing a lot of script editing over COVID, which I've really enjoyed. Helping some other people kind of form their stories and that kind of stuff, which has been great, because in this environment, I have found it very hard to have new ideas and to generate, and things that I thought I wanted to write have turned out just to not be at all relevant anymore. And so it's just been a real good time for me to just work on some other people's stuff and kind of get my brain back to you know, back to neutral again. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here.
Yeah, thank
right?
you.
And sharing all these insights to your film. I mean, everyone, I'm sure, is going to love it. I'm sure they did love it because they're watching this after the film.
Good luck with your new projects. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
And thank you everybody for watching us.
Thank you.